Okay, great. Music won't stop. Just refuse to stop. Welcome everyone. Welcome to Museum of the African Diaspora. The music was by Barbara Alkin. It's called Am I the Same Girl? Welcome, and my name is Sadeh, and I'm with my colleagues Dimitri, Remy, Aswan, and Charlie. And I would just want to say MoAD's physical building may be closed due to the mandatory shelter in place, but you can get your fill of art and artists of the African diaspora. Every other Thursday at 2 p.m., you can join us. You can join MoAD Docents as we look at art with you, with curiosity and wonder. We contextualize the art and discuss the artists and the art form with you. And we say whatever wonderful thing comes to our minds because that's art as we see it. We will follow all talks with an audience Q&A, but we encourage you to interact with us throughout our discussion. And this week's Art as we see it, we look at sculptures by Black artists from 19th and 20th century. We searched digital public domain archives to bring you selected works, and we invite you to join our conversation via chat. If you are joining us on Facebook, please leave us comments and we'll jump in and out of Zoom to check on you. And before we start, I would like us to have a quick quiet moment to stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. Thank you, and I'd like to read our land acknowledgement. As many of us are settler, immigrants, and descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples whose land we are located. With deep respect, MoAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, our people, our work, and our network servers are our native lands, and thank the indigenous people of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Great, thank you, and welcome again. I'm pretty excited about this because this is our first three-dimensional exhibition or talk, and I would like us to start with a video. of the two talks, the two presentations that we're going to have. And on the second presentation, that was just to kind of give you an idea, we're going to talk about Augusta Savage, but it's nice to just be in that moment and spend some time with the art form, and of course with the legendary Augusta Savage. But we're going to start with we are going to start with Elizabeth. I just realized that the text is missing from this, and I apologize for that. Edmonia Lewis is what we're going to start with, and I will put the text in the chat so that you have it. Dimitri, cool. Would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, Aswan, did you want to start? Aswan and I are going to tag team this one.
I'd like you to start and I'll just hop in.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. So this is a portrait of the wonderful Edmonia Lewis, and I'll admit that I had heard of her, but I didn't know as much as now I feel like I know about her. This woman was just absolutely fascinating, and the more that I get to know about her, the more fascinated I become. She was born. She was born of mixed race parents. So her father was reportedly Haitian, and her mother was Chippewa from the Ojibwe people. And the interesting thing about Edmonia is that she completely reinvented herself in her life story. So as you read accounts, she changes them as they fit her. But what we do know is that she was orphaned at the age of before the age of 5, and raised by her maternal family. So she was part of the nomadic Native American tribe until she was about 12. At this time, she moves to Boston. Also, we don't know where she's born. Sometimes, when some accounts she said Ohio, and other accounts she said New York. Anyway, her brother came out west to be a gold miner, and he obviously made a lot of money because he was able to finance her to be one of the first African American, if not the first. And Charlie, you can jump in if you know the exact story. If anybody knows more details, first African American, female and African American to go to Oberlin. Now, So we'll get into her art. But anyway, at Oberlin, she gets accused of poisoning her 2 white roommates, and a mob comes and kidnaps her and attacks her and beats her. She gets acquitted of that crime. However, then in her very last term at Oberlin, she gets accused of stealing art supplies and is kicked out without a degree. Fascinating story. She ends up selling her artwork and finances her first trip to Europe. She ends up in Europe, in Rome, and she's, at the time, neoclassicism is really, really important to everyone in Rome at the time and in Italy. And so she picks up this style. However, like most sculptors, they're able to pay to have classes in anatomy. She's not able to as a Black woman. And so these other artists start taking her under their wing. And so what we'll see when we look at her artwork is very neoclassical style artwork that if you were to see in a museum, if you did not recognize her name, you may not know that this was created by a Black artist. We have to look in the context of this in the 19th century. So she's doing all of this, going to Oberlin in 1862, before the Emancipation Proclamation is even signed. And so, just the more that I learn about her, the more I'm just blown away, and I want to know so much more about her. I don't know if Aswan, if you wanted to add anything to the story.
No, actually, yeah, I like you, Dimitri. It's so much to put into a small space in time to talk about her, and there are some conflicting stories, but it's an amazing story for her. I do know that she also connected with abolitionists. Am I saying that correctly? Abolitionists, and actually sculpted some. She was able to not only get support from her brother, of course, who was making money, but also that was her half brother, actually. but also with support through abolitionists. I'm sorry, and just basically an amazing story. Going to Europe, being able to get a space there and create in Italy, in Rome. Just really blessed in terms of people that were supporting her. But she did have to overcome some, like you said at Oberlin, some the prejudice, because we don't really know what happened. But we do know that she did not complete that term there. But I'm really glad to see that she was successful later on in life, that she actually was able to support herself and make a considerable amount of money with her craft. In addition to looking at a new way, she was gifted in terms of having entry and people around her that were willing to help her. I think, okay, I didn't want to go further. I think Charlie might have something to add to that as well. No, Charlie, okay, because I know you mentioned that she had went to Oberlin, and that was one of the first institutions that actually accepted women and people of color.
Right. That's all I was going to say, is that they were the first school to do that.
Yeah.
Both blacks and women. So they were pretty progressive for the time.
Aswan, the first image that we have is the one that you liked the most from the ones that we were able to find, Cleopatra.
Well, that one was interesting, and I was wondering if anyone any of our guests might be able. Now, this is the death of Cleopatra, and if anyone knows the story, if they would like to say, normally, how do we? Oh goodness, I just lost the image. Okay, normally, when we see that her death portrayed throughout many images throughout the ages, we definitely see a figure that's reclined. But I'd like to see what the audience might, if there's anything that they would like to say about this piece. Now, this is, goodness, it was created for the 1876 Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. This sculpture is over 3,000 pounds of marble. And it again portrays the queen in her throes of death. Edmona liked to be able to address in her sculptures powerful women, strong women, as well as Native and African American women as well. But if I was reading somewhere, and somebody might want to jump in, that she did not want people to think she was doing self-portraits. So she was the images and that we'll see in these two don't clearly show the ethnicity or maybe the materials that are used. Okay, someone else. Oh, okay. Sometimes the materials used indicate ethnicity. So I think there was some mention of her trying to remain neutral in that, so she wouldn't be accused of creating her own image, but I don't know how true that is. So what do people see here?
But I also kind of want to add in the fact that when she was in Rome, the majority of the sculptors would hire, you would have assistants and you would have apprentices that would help you, which is an expensive undertaking. You have to pay those people. And so whether it was because she couldn't afford to, or because either she couldn't afford to or she wanted her own hand, she carved all of her work herself. And that's a really interesting thing about her work, which is very different than what was happening in Rome. And also this sculpture that we see right now, it vanished for 100 years. It ended up on a racetrack. It ended up in front of inside of a saloon. It ended up all over the place, lost to history for 100 years. When she shipped it from Rome, this 3,000-pound marble sculpture, no one bought it. And so she actually exhibited it another time. I don't remember exactly the place she did in my notes right now, but it never sold. And so it vanished into obscurity, and it ended up in front of a racetrack, actually covered in graffiti, exposed to the elements. Boy Scouts actually wanted to help restore it, and so they painted it. And so when someone found it in the 1990s, it was totally covered, and the Smithsonian had to restore it. So what we actually see may or may not be how she intended the sculpture to look, because it sat in different elements, and in, I think at one point is even in a junkyard. It was in all of these crazy places, exposed to the it was outside, exposed to the elements, except for when it was inside of a saloon. And so, like, as we look at the details, the marble has started to wear away. And so they've tried to restore it to, from pictures at the dawn of photography, from what it actually looked like. It's on the 3rd floor of the Smithsonian American Art Museum right now.
Oh, wow. One of the things I would, for me, one, it's in the, let's see, she's in a sitting position. It seems like that would not be,
it was really uncommon. Yeah, most of them showed her already. Yeah.
But the other thing is that she's a very curvy woman. Some images of Cleopatra, they have this idealized slim figure and laying in, in beautiful clothing. And here she's the clothing is what is it? I'm trying to look for a word, but it's garments are not just as though you were laying in repose or something. It's really disheveled. Thank you. I'm having a problem today. Sorry about that.
Okay. It's okay.
When we don't see that, we know that Cleopatra was a Ptolemy in a later period, just before the Romans came in. Of course, I guess most people would know. She was a very strong woman, and also considered a femme fatale in terms of being able to, when she claimed her space, she actually took out family members. So I don't know if she's capturing some of the power of women in her pieces. Somebody has comments here as well.
Yeah.
What were some of the places and sculptures? What were some of the places, the sculpture at that time? The name of the sculpture. This was Cleopatra.
It's of Cleopatra, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was.
Here it is.
Also, one of the really important things to note is that this was a common theme in Western sculpture, but most of the time Cleopatra was shown dead, already completely laid out, dead. What Edmonia decided to do, which was for us right now, it's not revolutionary, but at this time, in 1876, it was super revolutionary to show her in the moments after she decided to commit suicide by having herself be bitten by an asp, a poisonous snake. And so Edmonia is showing a woman who is in control of her own destiny. She has chosen to take her life. And actually, at the time when the sculpture was presented, a lot of the critics thought that this was just awful, and it was just how could you portray such violence? And they said it was vile. In my eyes, it's not. But I'm not back in 1876. And a lot of what we know about her story is that she took control of her own destiny. She created her own narratives about her life. And I'm talking about Edmonia Lewis at the time. And so the way that she represented Cleopatra as in control of her own destiny and control of her life, literally, speaks, I think, a lot to Edmonia and her own process. And someone else said that not a lot of Americans, I see in the chats, carved out of marble, because we don't have lots of marble stores here in the United States. So artists would go to Rome because Italy has incredible amounts of marble. That's why, the Romans were so into carving it, for one thing. So American artists had to go there to be able to have access, and again, in 2021, we can have whatever we want shipped to us, but in 1876, not so much.
Do you think that was too provocative as well?
They considered it provocative. I mean, but everything else with like the breast showing through the clothing is so classical,
And I think I was going to also say, just also looking at the size of her as a woman, I think that was also something of that time. Women were, if we think of the films of Cleopatra and all the actresses that have played this particular character, that have, one, not been Black, just to mention, but two, also been quite thin and quite slight, and but this, as we can see, as we look at this particular, her arm and the thickness of her wrists and the size of her hands and stuff like that, this is obviously quite a full rounded, full-bodied, real person who's not being portrayed as some waif. I think that's a word.
And I think that goes to her doing research. I believe that I read somewhere where she actually was doing primary research on that figure or that person, Cleopatra, looking at coinage and other things to determine a sort of a realistic, as you're saying, that we're looking at a full-figured woman, her image.
One thing that stood out to me is that the hieroglyphs on where she's sitting have no meaning. So so that was interesting, because immediately I was just like, oh, I wonder what they mean, because they look very, very familiar to the ones that we have seen in Egyptian art. That was interesting that she took the liberty of kind of making up her own in a way.
And also, the breasts and nipples as well. Right. I mean, even till today, if we show breasts and nipples in 2021, maybe not so much in, San Francisco and LA and in America, but, women's breasts are still an issue. And the fact that at this time, these boobies are just really full and voluptuous and big, and I think is quite fabulous.
Yeah, all woman. She also, they don't show it in this view, but the ass is on her right, our left, on the side. So it is included in the picture. I could never really make out what was on her head, if that was sort of the headdress, but yeah, it was hard to see.
It's
something that was common amongst Egyptian rulers, is they would have a frontispiece, which I can't remember the name of now.
I don't know if it would protrude that far out.
Oh, it would, yeah. Someone's saying that it looks like an asp as well. I just can't remember the name of it. But you'd see, for example, Tutankhamun would have that.
But
I don't mean Tutankhamun,
but they don't extend. Just that's pretty far out. But anyway, I could be missing it. Yeah.
So what about the old arrow maker?
I saw two stories on that one, and one was that she was inspired by. Okay, let me get his name together. It's Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. I don't want to get tongue-tied here. And his piece on Hiawatha, And that was one story that this was inspired by a Dakota woman being offered to or waiting for Ojibwe male to come, and I think that was on the Smithsonian site actually, for marriage or to be taken. But another one just says that this is a father showing his daughter how he makes arrows. What it raised for me was the question is, it was that a woman's, we had roles in certain times, and I wasn't sure if making arrows was something that women did. Supposedly, I think the garment was supposed to be that he's wearing is traditional, and he has more in some comment that he has more Native American features than, again, the woman, who is sort of stripped of this identity. Just well, not stripped, I would say it's not as apparent, is what I should say.
Yeah. Also, I'm gonna put it into a historical context because that's what I do. I'm thinking about that. Yeah. What was really significant about this piece, and again, I think when we first saw these, it was just like, okay, why is this significant African American artist? But just really thinking about it, I started looking at depictions of Native Americans during this time, and this was not the time of Americans presenting Native American folks as what became later the noble savage. This was just straight savagery and violence was how they were represented, and so her work was an immediate departure from that representation.
Wow.
This really connects to her experiencing her Native American ancestry, and depicting it with respect and with love. And so, yeah, actually, Aswan, you're right. This is actually part of a larger series that she did. And so I do not remember their names, but these two actually have names, and it's from Wadsworth's Song of Hiawatha. She was really inspired by that. And actually, I'm going to pull out a quote that she says. So she was really, because she grew up nomadic and not within the urban context, which again, very different for African Americans who are able to make it to Oberlin and travel around the world. She says, in 1864, there's nothing so beautiful as the free forest. She goes on to talk about fishing and hunting for her own food. And she said, I would not stay a week pent up in cities if it were not for my passion for art. So, she's someone who really looks at her Native American ancestry and experience. And for her, that's the highest value in life. And that's what she wanted to convey through this series of sculptures. So I want to say that there was at least 3 of them within the series that were all based on Wadsworth or Longfellow's Song of Hiawatha, and she got to meet him in Rome. They actually got to meet and link up. And the interesting thing about Edmonia, I also want to add, is that the majority of her work is lost to history. It was destroyed. It wasn't valued during its time, so it didn't make it into museums and major collections at the time. And and I think that a lot of had to do with, she was this rare, really the first famous African American sculptor, or Native American and African American sculptor. And just her work was not valued at the time. Like, she doesn't really start to emerge and people start to investigate her work and be inspired by it until the 1970s, and really strongly into the 1990s. So, almost a century after her death, does she start to really emerge as this powerful influence on African American sculptors.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that Roger just said about the detail. And so I think just not only the detail, but also remembering that this is marble, you know, it's really heavy. The level of talent and the level of focus and concentration one must have to even manipulate tools to get this kind of, you see the definition of his muscles, you see all of the hands, the different textures, that from the necklace to the fabric that he's wearing to the pearls that she's wearing. I mean, even though it's all in white, you can almost see color. You know, I think this is something we talk about a lot with black and white photographs, seeing value, but also with something all in white, we can also see value as well.
Thank you for that. So we're going to move on to our next artist. I know we could have spent more time with Edmonia Lewis's art. Our next artist is William Edmondson. He's everybody's favorite. So I'm just going to ask, let's watch a video really quickly. And this is a clip from, or this is a trailer from a film that came out in 2014 or 15, and just gives us an idea of his surroundings.
These here's miracles I can do. Can't nobody do them but me.
Little becomes much when you place it in the master's hands.
He was much more astute than we give him credit for.
The reason I became a sculptor is largely due to Edmondson.
I heard some people said the man was crazy. But that wasn't my way of thinking.
William, what are you doing? And who are those monuments for? They're for my heavenly daddy. And I'm doing the work of the Lord.
Alfred Starr took me to meet William Edmondson. I was maybe 15 or 16 years old. He had a very wide front yard, and it was like a Disneyland. Everywhere you looked, there were these little creatures, animals, angels, characters out of the Bible. It was like he had come from another world.
Edmondson literally had a special calling. He got these messages from on high. We have to believe him to a certain extent because he gave us a new vision. And that's what art does.
In 1937, William Edmondson became the first African American to earn a solo exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art.
The modernists were predisposed to notice certain things. They were able to look at Edmondson's work and noticed its economy, its forthrightness and straightforwardness.
The 62-year-old tombstone carver was a most unlikely choice in a most unlikely time and place.
Nashville was as segregated as any city in South Africa at the height of apartheid.
Most people in this country said there was no such thing as black art. Blacks did not have a creative bone in their body.
God, said William Edmondson, implanted the seed of carving in me. His carvings, in turn, have sown the seeds of inspiration for new generations of artists.
He was much more astute than we give him credit for. He was seeing so much more than what the average person sees.
His journey wasn't for him alone. His journey was encouragement for everyone that was going to come along behind him.
All right. What came up? What did you think of that video and the information that was shared in that video? And also, we're just going to jump into the next piece, but I'd like to hear what people thought.
I think for me, the first time I saw a picture of Edmondson, it just struck me that he looked like James Baldwin. There was a similarity in his countenance or in his beingness or something. And so that was the first thing. And then just looking at this film again and looking at him, there's just this very cheerfulness, even though he's carving these tombstones, for want of a better word. There's just this very effervescent cheerfulness about the fact that this is a calling from God, that he has been given this dominion, that he has this purpose. And I think that's something a lot of artists do feel. But the fact that he was able to really articulate it and just be okay with it, whereas sometimes we get to hide behind, well, it's this and it's that, and it's like, no, it's from God. It's okay to say those words.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting story. I mean, he had really, really humble beginnings. You know, his parents were former slaves, and you know, the fact that he was illiterate essentially, and so working as a tombstone carver, people would have to bring him a little piece of paper that would have what it is that they wanted on the tombstone, and then he would chip away. And then, you know, this idea that he had such humble beginnings that he was literally making tools from what he had. You know, he used to work on the railroad, and so he used these railroad spikes. He didn't use I was going to say scalpel. Help me out here. What's the piece that you hit with the hammer? The chisel. He didn't have a chisel, so he literally was using these railroad spikes as a chisel. And you know, he had these kind of, you know, funky homemade hammers, and you know, he would just leave this stuff lying around in his front yard, which is how he got discovered. You know, one of the neighbors walked by, and of course, then these famous photographs got taken of his work and sent to Alfred Barr at MoMA. Remy, what do you think of this one?
Well, one of the things I wanted to say about the rabbit as well is, and just reading a little bit about some of the, you know, and how this connects to our culture, and in terms of where the rabbit shows up in stories, as in Brer Rabbit, but also in the Nancy stories, but also in a lot of African traditions where the rabbit is a euphemism almost for the trickster. You know, it's quick-witted, it lives by its wits, and so I think it's also interesting what animals he chose to focus on, and what parts of, like the crucifixion, the teachers, what he chose to bring into being, given the fact that he felt that he was anointed as well. And so rabbits, Easter, bunnies, I don't know.
Yeah, I want to kind of like jump in on there too, just because I'm obsessed with the South and folklore in the South. And so Brer Rabbit is a lot, his stories really come out in the 19th century, but the oral tradition of Brer Rabbit predates those for African American communities. And he's the trickster, and he's really a lot of scholars look at his character as really the enslaved African American and the tricks that he plays against the slave master. So they're hidden in these stories because it's the only way you could tell the story about you know, tricking the oppressor during these times. And so, you know, just knowing that he's in the South, he had to know these stories.
I just think also, if you look at this aesthetically, it's really wonderful. It's so solid and so, you know, it's really present. And, you know, we always talk about the importance of triangles in art and what that means to really set the sort of basis of an artwork. And here he's doing that, but he's doing it completely intuitively, because, you know, he wouldn't have traveled around. He would have had the opportunity to go to a lot of these museums, but he's just instinctively doing that. So you know, especially when you look at that, it has such a formal shape to it, and such a solidity, so stability, that I love it. And then he adds the texture to it. You know, with this particular close-up, you can see how he's you know, creating that fur, if you will, by using, you know, these little chips away at his little rail spike. It's great.
And I think it's a great example where we talk about less is more. You know, I mean, I think sometimes as artists, we can overindulge ourselves with detail. And I think there's a time and a place, obviously, for all of that. But there's no eyes, there's no whiskers, there's no nose, you know, but yet we know it's a rabbit. We all just accept that it's a rabbit and our version of a rabbit as well. So.
And I love Catherine's comment, you know, with a kind of whimsy. And I think that you'll see that in a lot of his smaller works. There really is a sense of whimsy.
This is untitled, but you know, in brackets bird, obviously. But this one is interesting to me because he also he does things from the Bible, right? The images from the Bible and the bird in the biblical sense, and what does it mean? So just like the rabbit, I started to kind of think about what the bird could possibly mean. The only thing I could think of was the dove. Is anything else? Yeah.
Definitely the dove.
Sorry.
I was going to say, but also I'm assuming that he would have seen rabbits and birds running around, you know, the local area. So this is something he would have been watching as well and capturing the essence or while he was either chipping away or working.
And there was a question from, who was it? Oh, I see. It was already answered. The question was what the material was, is limestone. And what's interesting is they tell this great story about how, because his front yard was filled with all these works that he had done, that he became sort of known amongst the local people. And some of the people who were working in these limestone quarries, if they had extra bits of limestone, they would just drop it off at his house so that, you know, he was able to have more material to work with. It's just, you know, it's just a really nice story about a community sort of supporting his artistic endeavor. He was not in any position to be buying this stuff.
What's the nature of limestone? What is it like if folks can share their experience with limestone or, yeah.
This is Rodney. I just wanted to jump in and say I really am intrigued by like what he chooses to show and what he doesn't show. And it reminds me a lot of a sculptor like Brancusi, who also kind of gets at the essence of things. And that's what I find that really attractive about these pieces.
That's a great. Go ahead, Dimitri.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that there's in particular a Brancusi that I was thinking of when we were looking at this piece. I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the chat so people can look at that. But you're absolutely right, and you know, and as we know, one would not have seen the other, you know, and that's I think the really interesting piece. I went ahead and put this. I'm sorry, I said that directly to Rodney. I'll send everybody the link for the Brancusi that we're talking about. But I just wanted to say one thing about the bird, because I found this really wonderful quote of his, which I think is lovely. Again, we talked about how, you know, all this came from a vision from God, and, you know, he would have these hallucinations at night, which he would then go on and create. And what he said is, every piece of work I got carved is a message, a sermon, you might say. I think that's a really lovely quote. You know, I'm not a religious person, but, you know, that's the way he thought of his work, is that these were literally coming from his church, you know, the church of his mind, if you will.
Yeah, exactly, Charlie. I'm glad you said it, because kind of one of the things that fascinates me so much about him is that he is untaught. And even, and I don't know if it said in the video or not, but in another interview that I read, he talks about how he wasn't doing this to be an artist at all. He said that people from museums and galleries started coming to him because they heard about him, and then they told him that he was an artist. He said that he was doing this because his visions told him to do it, and he was doing it. He was creating these for his community as a message, and not as a commodity to be in a gallery or in a museum. So, you know, it's an interesting way to think about it. And then simultaneously, mainstream American art started to move in to this direction. So then his work that he was already taking these minimal forms started to inspire all of these American artists at the time. Just fascinating.
And of course, I find this piece really fascinating. You know, let's go to Europe and look at depictions of Jesus. They don't look like this. You know, this is Black Jesus. This is not European Jesus, you know, and it's just, again, in its simplicity and its solidity and its fullness, it's so powerful and so wonderful. And I really love the sort of innocence that he gets in the face that really makes it very human for us.
It reminds me, I saw a comment from Roger that he was thinking of ancient art, and it makes me think of the Etruscan sculptures. But you know, like you said, Charlie, he's just so original that he comes to this on his own. I really admire that.
Black Jesus looks like he's got an afro. I'm just saying.
Yeah, exactly. This is not Jesus with a long flowing dark hair that you usually see in Europe. Oh, it's nice. And Catherine saying that if you could just go back for just a minute today, Catherine is saying that she sees a feminine aspect to this Jesus, which I would agree with.
Definitely.
The fact that he's standing too, he's not kind of, suspended, standing.
Well, this when I saw this, it's kind of had this feeling that he's standing and is about to carry the cross, as opposed to, even though it's called the crucifixion, as opposed to what we usually see is poor Jesus hanging from the cross.
Oh, that's a good point.
Not that either or of those images are pleasant, but
and this is the one I was talking about that really reminds me of the Brancusi that I put in the link. Again, if you think about the dimensions of this, if you think about what the geometry of this piece is, it's really unusual. And I think that's what makes it, you get this sense of absolute movement, the way he has her leaning forward, breasts forward, hair back. You really get the sense that she is traveling in time, and she's got the book in her hand. She's on a mission, so this is the teacher, and she's off to teach her students. It's a great depiction.
And I think because we talk about the diasporic lean as well. Yes. And I have to say, that whole hair movement forward, to me, she's a Black woman on her way to class.
Black teacher.
She's a Black teacher on her way to class to give those children what she has for them, her offerings. I love it.
Later on we'll talk about reductionist and all those kind of things that artists start with something, depart from something, those kind of things. But I wonder, and I wanted to bring this up, as when we say that an artist is self-taught, or they're folk artists, or those kind of things, what is their place in the art world or in the art conversation? I just want to hear from the docents, or if folks have, our participants have ideas of how that is taken in the art world, or how we see art.
I have to say, I think people like that deserve a great deal of admiration. That we have this orthodoxy of art that constrains people, and we need people who are outside of that. That otherwise art is not going to be vibrant. It's not going to really be living. So you have to really listen to people like William Edmondson.
I also wonder, having areas of art that I've trained in and areas of art that I haven't trained in, is that sometimes we train, and then once we get into the world, we then have to let go of everything that we learned while we were training in order to be free. So right. I feel like, this is a way to be free before you get contained. And the fact that, we're talking about his parents being in slavery, and this kind of not being trained and not being contained, and so therefore this art comes out of a really free thinking artist.
Or spiritually led in a way too, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oof. Today is amazing. I can be here all day. We have to move on.
So I'm gonna try to do this one really fast.
You don't have to.
I'm gonna try to not go into it for too long, but this is the amazing Elizabeth Catlett, and I love that it says Elizabeth Catlett Mora in here. And so, just like a really abbreviated story on her is that she is the granddaughter of enslaved African Americans raised in Washington D.C. by a single mother, not on purpose, not because she had an absentee father. Her father died. Anyway, she in the 1930s during the Great Depression, she ends up at the Carnegie Institute of Technology, currently Carnegie Mellon University, and she studies art, goes on to study at Howard to get her MFA, the very first MFA in sculpture of anyone. And where I think last time we talked about Lois Mayu Jones was one of her instructors, as well as Alain Locke, who came up in Jackie Francis's lecture
yesterday.
Yeah, so all of these connections with her, and her professor Grant Wood, who is also an artist, encouraged her to experiment, not to lock herself into any one form of art making. And so she does printmaking, painting, drawing, sculptures, and all kinds of materials, bronze, clay, wood. She kind of does everything, total multi-hyphenate. Anyway, she wins in the 1946, she gets a grant from the Rosenwald Foundation. Quick note, Rosenwald was a German Jewish philanthropist who made a lot of his money with Sears and Roebucks. Anyway, I thought that was an important thing, the Jewish African-American connection at this time. And she goes off to Mexico City with her husband, Charles White at the time. While there, she ends up meeting her future husband, and I don't know the whole story about that.
Teachers always got these stories.
I love the dramas of it. And so Francisco Mora, so, you know, and she ends up divorcing her husband and marrying Francisco, teaches from 1958 to 1976 at the National Fine Arts Institute, and then comes back to the United States, and her in the 70s, and her work explodes because the feminist movement is going on in the 70s and 80s, and her work is really speaking to Blackness and female identity at this just kind of this perfect time. And that's where she just explodes. And I don't think, you know, when I talk to a lot of contemporary African-American artists, there's very few who will not say that she is a huge influence on their work. I'm gonna pull a little quote out also because I like my little quotes. She also says in 2005 in an interview, because I'm a woman, and know how a woman feels in body and mind, I sculpt, draw, and paint women, but generally Black women. And so that's kind of like summarizes what she spent her life doing. When she comes really into her time with her work post World War II, everyone's doing abstraction, but she refuses to do that and continues to work in a figurative manner. Aswan, I'll turn this one over to you.
Oh, goodness. Okay. Well, I don't know. Would you consider this an abstraction? I think that they had Black artists from the 20s all the way to the 70s and beyond. We're looking at, what is it? Modernism? Is that a modernist artist? Looking at appropriating or African sculpture. I don't know about this. You had mentioned you thought this might be a sort of like a representation, or sort of looks like Fang. It's interesting because it's called, it's the singing, isn't it the singing head?
Yeah, there's the singing head.
Singing head. It's a beautiful piece, Mexican marble. It reminds me because of the, it's not some, it lacks symmetry. that which is on purpose. It reminds me more of a Pende mask. But I don't think she's necessarily copying the form as much as, I guess, just interpreting her own, because presentation, you may know because it sounds like you know a lot. Dimitri, so you can tell me, but I just noticed.
I just nerded out over it.
The symmetry, and also there was a big push around that time too. Leopold Senghor, sort of the person, former president of Senegal, but also was probably one of the founders, if not co-founder, of the Negritude movement. There was this whole, he looks at this type of work, and he actually organized an exhibition called Picasso, Black Art, and the Civilization of the Universal, that really talks about acknowledging Africa's place within the global modernity. This is not necessarily a male or female. I think the marble is beautiful. Does somebody else like to comment? But I just those are my only comments on this one.
Yeah, I think you kind of really hit it on the head, at least for me. I think when she's creating this work and really looking to African sculpture, and that's why I say just the features of it, the way that the face is sunken in, like that, it reminds me of the Fang masks so much. And those are the same masks that Modigliani and Picasso and all of these artists were inspired by, and how appropriate for an African American artist to go back and look at her own cultural legacy for inspiration in her art. And yes, she certainly is not adhering perfectly to the geometry of it. I just find it just really, really gorgeous.
What I like about it is if you look at the mask's left eye, our right side, she's using the defects in the marble as the eye. I mean, I was looking at it a little bit more closely, and I don't think that part is carved. I think she's deliberately using the grain, if you will, of the marble. The fact that it makes those two parallel horizontal lines. She utilizes that as the eyes. And then if you compare it to the opposite side, it's really fascinating. I mean, it gives you the impression almost of a wink, doesn't it? You really get this sense of almost like a trick is being played on you. It's quite lovely. And I also think it's great because, Osman, you were saying, well, is this abstract? Is this classical? I mean, it really is a combination of the two. There's no question that she's nodding her head to modernism as well. And so I think that's what makes it really come alive for me. She's really combining two different styles.
I think the next piece is going to be very different. It's this one. And it's the title that really gets me. And we keep on getting Phyllis Whitley for some reason. I think her spirit is just looking to be present with us. But it's so interesting to me how immediately when I saw this, the first thought that I had was like, oh, a student. I don't know why. I did not think of, I could not have possibly thought of Phyllis Whitley. Yeah.
So the interesting thing about this one, I did do some research on this sculpture.
I knew it.
So yeah, I mean, a few sessions ago, we talked about Phyllis Wheatley and her place and why she was so important as a writer and as an artist. Brought as a child from West Africa and enslaved and learns to write. We can go through the story of Phyllis Wheatley, but what I learned about this is that Phyllis Wheatley actually disappeared from American, no one really knew about her for nearly 200 years. So she becomes really famous in her day. and she falls to the wayside, and no one really remembers her. And this sculpture is really significant, or at least with Smithsonian American Art Museum says, or sorry, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, is that when Elizabeth Catlett decides to make this sculpture of her, that she thrusts Phyllis Wheatley back into the popular narrative. And so people started to look at her and think about her and talk about her during this time. And so very much like the image on her, on the cover of Phyllis Wheatley's book of poetry, Catlett shows her with the finger in this very pensive pose, showing that she's thoughtful, that she's very knowledgeable and educated. And so, just the magic of a pose right there. And she's also posing her, conveying her in bronze, which is the material that all of our icons are made from. And so, yeah, there's just something really exciting and interesting about that story for me that really elevates this piece to the fact that, I grew up always knowing who Phyllis Wheatley was because I wasn't born in 1973 yet. but just to look back and it's like, this artist had the impact by creating this work to be able to bring this back into the popular culture. People started to talk and look at Phyllis Wheatley and the importance of her work.
There's a couple. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Osman.
Oh no, I was just going to read a couple of comments. Is that what you were about to do, Charlie?
I was going to make another comment, just that that we have this statue of her with her finger like this, looking very, very pensive, and that's that's based on what we showed I think 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Right, was a lithograph by Scipio Moorhead that shows her sort of in that position. So it's, it's sort of a nod to that book. So of course she didn't have a real model to work with, right? The person's been dead for 200 years. So the only thing that we have is this two-dimensional image. And so she's creating this three-dimensional image from that. But one of the things that I think technique-wise is really lovely in this work is that if you really follow the veins of her neck, how she very subtly changes the texture so that, we see that she's wearing a shirt. I think at first blush, you think she's not wearing anything, but when you look more carefully, she's done a very, very subtle sculpting technique to show that she is clothed. It's really quite brilliant.
Yeah, you can see the neckline of the dress that she's wearing and created this really gorgeous texture of whatever she's wearing on the top, and the difference between the texture of the garment and the texture of the neck is quite remarkable.
Well, these works could not possibly be any more different than one from the other. And Dimitri, thank you for bringing this one to us, because I had no idea about this one, and it's just beautiful. It's at Howard University, of course. She has a lot of connection to that university as well. So yeah, a relief sculpture.
Bronze.
This one, relief. Yeah.
It maybe your close-ups will show more because I don't know if you want to move forward with this, Dimitri. I was just going to say it was hard to notice until I looked elsewhere that here, okay, you do have it, you do show it. Okay, at the roots we have masks or faces. Go ahead, Dimitri. I'll let you go ahead and introduce it now.
Yeah, this was done for the Science and Technology Hall, and that's not the name of it. I forget the exact name of it.
Chemical Engineering Wing.
Thank you.
We'll see the iconography up at the top.
and so like 26 artists submitted proposals, and then I think they narrowed it down to 6. And anyway, she was chosen, and the image is of a male and a female student embracing each other. And when you, if we could zoom out on it, you can see that the way that they're holding each other is almost like a dance, with her hand on his shoulder, his on her waist. And and they're holding up together a sign that's used for other things right now, the unity symbol, the equality symbol. And she was thinking about racial equality, she was thinking about gender equality, and then also the other symbols are about the sciences. And together they're rooted together. And she describes these as different faces, actually. But yeah, you're right, Aswan. On closer observation, they do look like masks. But she's thinking about all the different aspects of African American identity and African diasporic identity, really, that have to come together in order to pave the way for future generations to enter something like the sciences.
Right. You know, I'm sorry, were you finished?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I do have a quote for her quote for this piece. And for me, it looks like, you know, we all stand on the shoulders of ancestors that are before us, and that plaque shows, and even the brick to me indicates foundation, a strong foundation, and equity in terms of both male and female, as well as racial identity, social equality. But I'll just wanted to read her quote, or when she did this, she said, "The two students are holding each other up to express unity rather than the competition that exists in education. The equal sign signifies scientific as well as social equity, that everyone should be equal, men to women, student to faculty, Blacks to everyone else. The students form a trunk of a tree. The medallions are arranged in a triangle-like branches, and the plaque represents the roots." And of course, we see, again, the roots include the ancestors at the bottom. It's just a beautiful piece.
Oh, I never noticed their eyes looking up. Oh, that's just such a great piece. Well, we're going to end today's tour with this piece, and we want to thank all of you for joining us, and we invite you to join us in a couple of weeks for part 2. And we have some amazing artists to bring and discuss, and really nice pieces to discuss with you. And with that, I want to thank our docents. They're amazing, and I can be here all day with them. And I also would like to thank our sponsors and donors. And if you are interested in supporting us, please visit our website and you can make a donation. Also, you can just support us by showing up or being here by contributing to our discussions. Thank you very much, all of you, and we will see you in 2 weeks.